We're diving into week 3 of our series. We've started a series called When Tragedy Strikes, and it's a story of redemption through the book of Ruth, Old Testament book called Ruth. And so to kind of set things up, so far we've walked through chapter 1. And in chapter 1 we're introduced to a family of 4 that lives in Bethlehem, or the land of Judah. A great famine hits the land, and they're pushed out of their land into a place that they probably didn't want to be in, a place called Moab. But the famine forced them there. In that time period, within 10 years, the father and the 2 boys die. And the 2 boys, by that time, happened to already have been married. So now, this family of 4, out of the family of 4, there's one remaining of that family of 4. Her name is Naomi, and she has these 2 daughter-in-laws that have just been widowed like her. Last week we talked about that the Lord had visited the land of Judah, and there was a lifting of the famine, and so Naomi wants to head back to her hometown. It's the only thing she has left other than her God, which she's blamed for her demise, by the way. But nonetheless, she wants to go back. And as these 2 daughter-in-laws are tagging along, she tries to get them to return back to their land, Moab, so they can start their lives all over again and act as if maybe the last chapter hasn't happened in their lives. One of Orpah, takes her up on the offer and goes back to her people, but the second daughter-in-law, named Ruth, will not return to her people. She is determined to cling to Naomi, her land, her people, and her God. And so they come back to the land of Judah, these 2 widows. And as you can imagine, as she returns, Naomi's missing a few members of her family and has a new member that's tagging along. And there's kind of a like in most communities, there's a little bit of a chatter going on, and Naomi returns different than she had left and wants to be known. Instead of Naomi, which means sweet or pleasant, she wants to be called Mara, meaning bitter, because the Lord has dealt her this hand, in essence. And so that's where we left off. Today we're going to begin and jump back in to our story, beginning in chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech. That was Naomi's husband. So a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Verse 2, and Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain. So in verse 1, the writer is giving the reader information that not all characters in the story are aware of. And sometimes writers do that as they're writing a book. They want to give information to you so that you can know, as we're about to move ahead or move forward in the story, there's some things they want you to know that the people in the story don't know. And that's what's kind of happening here. Naomi's deceased husband, whose name was Elimelech, has a living relative that is a worthy man. And this family, we studied the names of that family in weeks past, but just as a reminder, this family of Elimelech's is known for strong names, like powerfully God-centered, strong names. Elimelech, who passed, his name meant God is king, which was ironic because the last verse of Judges was, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's this timeline where this story of Ruth takes place. Now, we've talked about this before, that when God revealed his law to the Israelites, he provided a number of ways to eliminate poverty from among them. For instance, in Deuteronomy chapter 15 and verse 4, God is speaking to his people about as they enter into this land of promise. And he says in Deuteronomy 15 verse 4, chapter 15 verse 4, "But there will be no poor among you." You're like, what? That world doesn't exist. And you're right, it doesn't exist today. But God's plan for the Israelites in this new land was that there be no more poor among you. For the Lord will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance to possess. And he was clear that there would be nations or peoples around them that would have poor, and they would be a blessing to those people because there would be enough resources for them to not only take care of not having poor in their land and in their people, but that they'd be able to bless those around them who were. That was God's intent. Now, that's not what happened. As we know the Old Testament story, or as you've maybe followed it, God had plans and stipulations, and Israel was not able to uphold that plan or to keep in walking in obedience to his commands. But that was put in place so there would be no poor among them. So that's God's heart. This is important. We should understand that, and then we should look into this story through that lens, that this is like God's heart. We should care for the poor because God cares for the poor. And this was true then for Naomi and Ruth, and this is true today. Continuing in verse 2. Let me read the first part of verse 2 because we kind of stopped mid-verse there. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain." She continues, "After him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, and she is Naomi, said to Ruth, "Go, my daughter." So a lot is going on in just this last half of verse 2. We've kind of already read the first half. Let's look at the last half. So we know that Ruth has already asked to go to the field to glean from the ears of grain that were to be left for, again, the poor and the sojourner. But the latter half of the verse adds, "After him in whose sight I shall find favor." So that word, favor, what would have been expected to be used there for that term would be a word that would mean mercy. But that's not the word that was used. The word that was used actually is closer to the word that we know in our English language today, the word grace. Now you say grace and mercy, it's the same thing. No, they're not. They're cousins, but they're not the same. Mercy is not getting the punishment that you deserve. Grace is receiving a blessing that you have not earned. So you can use them kind of interchangeably in conversation because they're both great words, and we're thankful for both of those words, but they're not the same. But the word that Ruth is looking for is not mercy. She's not looking for mercy. She's looking for grace. She's looking for more than grain. She's looking for grain, but she's also looking for grace. Now, whether this is human or divine grace, we don't know. But we do know the word that's used is whose sight I may find grace. Okay? So it should be noted that here in the midst of this tragedy that these two women have walked through, losing their loved ones, losing their family, that it's here in the midst of that Ruth's eyes are open to her need for grace. Again, to divine or human, I'm not sure, but grace for sure. Grace, whether it's divine or human, Ruth is actively looking for grace. Not mercy, grace. And that's what tragedy can do. And my personal opinion is that one of the reasons that God allows tragedy into the lives of believers, and I think there's many, but I think one of the reasons that God allows tragedy into our lives is to open our eyes to our need for grace. Gosh, especially in our country, especially in the West, where we are so self-sufficient. Like, I got this. You know, proud and I don't need your help. In that environment, most people don't wake up and go, man, I need grace, apart from a work of the Holy Spirit in their heart, because they've got all they need. But it's generally those that are in the midst of tragedy, those that are walking through horrible circumstances, where our eyes are open for our need for grace. And I'll be honest with you, I look at the American church or the church in the West, and that's really the only one that I know, because I haven't been able to travel other than in Mexico to other parts of the world. But I know the stories that I hear of missionaries from all around the globe, and there is an awareness, and the eyes are opened of people who are in actual poverty and actual need to what matters most. And I think God allows tragedy to happen in our lives. And I'll be honest with you, I think that God, if our nation plays out anything like I've seen him use the timeline or the circumstances of a person's life, I would think that we have tragedy and things coming for us as a nation, as a church. And some of you are like, what kind of message is this? This is like a doomsday message. And it's like, no, I'm just making an observation that tragedy seems to open our eyes to the things that actually matter. It plucks us out of this just mindless ritual that we get in, and it causes us to really wrestle to the ground, like, what is it that I actually need most, or what matters most to me? Like people that have very little, that are depending upon God on their next meal, they're not playing church. They don't know how. Thankfully. Here in the midst of this tragedy, Ruth's eyes are open to her need for grace. Again, whether human or divine, it is not really of importance. Because as you'll see, the one will open up the door for the other. Also in verse 2, we have a response from Naomi to Ruth's request. And you're thinking, well, of course Naomi's what's she going to say? No, I want to sit here and starve to death. But you need to understand that in that question from Ruth to Naomi, can I go glean? Can I go glean from the fields? What she's basically asking is the request of a poor person, the request of a sojourner, someone that's not from this land, categorizing them in a category that maybe Naomi had never been in before. Naomi had once relied upon her husband and her sons for provision, and they are now dead. And so whether she likes it or not, Naomi accepts the category she now fits in. Poor. And she grants Ruth's permission. Continuing in verse 3, so she set out and went, this is Ruth, and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. And so for the reader, since verse 1, we're thinking, when are these characters going to meet? And boom, in verse 3, it happens. Ruth just so happens to come in contact with the character that the audience was introduced to back in verse 1. Boaz. Swift strength. And all we know at this point is that Boaz is a relative of Naomi's deceased husband, Elimelech. That's really all that we know. And we found out that he happens to own a field. And the field that this just so happened to have a relative is the field that Ruth just so happens to walk in. She just so happens, like Naomi, just so happens to have a relative of her husband. And then this foreign young widow just so happens to wander in that guy's field. Continuing in verse 4. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered, "The Lord bless you." So verse 4 here gives us kind of a glimpse of the celebration that harvest brought. Like it was a time of celebration any year, but especially coming out of a great famine. So the fact that these people were coming into the field, I mean, there was a thankfulness and a gratitude, not just to this man in the field that he owned, but ultimately what they just celebrated. The Lord be with you, right? The Lord be with you. And then the people said back to him, "The Lord bless you." I mean, I love that. Here in the greeting, the Lord is given credit for his presence, and the Lord is given credit for the harvest that they are enjoying. And rightly so. Continue in verse 5. Then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Whose young woman is this?" And the servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers." So she came, and she continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest. So in verse 5, it seems that Boaz notices or takes interest in this young lady gleaning from his field. And one could assume that the reason is maybe a physical attraction, but there's really no evidence for that here in these verses. You know, people who like, love stories could kind of insert that into the text, but we don't know that. We just know that he notices her, and probably because she doesn't look like a Bethlehemite, she doesn't look like she's from the land of Judah, and she's not with anyone, which a young woman would not be traveling alone. That's literally like, that's a bad idea, unless you want horrible things to happen to you. So he notices her. And the foreman catches Boaz, the owner of the field, up to speed. Ruth is this young woman, a foreigner, and she came back with Naomi. Verse 7 gives us an inward glimpse to who Ruth really is. First thing that this foreman gives to, the first bit of information the foreman gives to Boaz is that Ruth understands and respects authority because she requests, "Please let me glean." The second thing that we see is like a lens into Ruth's character. So we know that she understands how authority works and she respects authority because she's coming in and requesting, "May I have permission, please, to glean?" But then also she waits patiently until this permission is granted. Now, if you're reading the text in most of your English Bibles, you would not see this clearly laid out. But the text that says, she has worked steadily, actually would be that she has stood. And so a Masoretic text of a Hebrew Bible says that she has come and she has stood. And so the way that we take a language and then try to translate it, these few verses, and then even one that we're going to get into here a bit later, they're unsure about what the actual meaning was because their language and our language don't really always match up. But looking back again at older manuscripts or older texts, it doesn't seem that the foreman is telling Boaz that she just asked and she's been working all day. And that's what most of your English Bibles would say. But again, if you have any Bible with notes, it'll say they're actually unsure about the meanings of these verses because it's shaky at best. There's not an easy way to translate over these words. But it seems that Ruth, well, what we know is that a landowner would be the only person that could give someone and grant them access to their field in this circumstance. And so with Ruth coming and saying, "May I have permission to glean after the reapers," that's not something a foreman has the authority to do. So again, when you're looking at old texts that don't exactly translate super easy over into the English, then we have to start looking at, well, what do we know about the day? Well, we know that that foreman would not have made that call because it's not his field. He's just stewarding it. It belongs to Boaz. And so it seems that as she's asked, she is standing there waiting until the authority over that field grants and gives her permission. So that would actually be a better, maybe a more accurate, or can I submit that as a very possible rendering of what that text means there? And that and then when we read, except for a short rest, even that last phrase is also shaky at best. It could be referring to the house or the place where she's been waiting to hear word from this landowner before she goes in and gleans after the reapers. But it's for sure, if we're following Ruth's character, we're looking at like the way that this young woman seems to operate, the way that she understands authority and the way that she asks permission, the way that she's treated Naomi, but then certainly now this foreman, it seems that she is waiting to hear word back. Continuing in verse 8. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field, or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." So when Boaz calls Ruth my daughter, he's not just like giving pleasantries. When he says those words, he is assuming Elimelech's place as the responsible patriarch of the family. This is a big deal. We talked about this a few weeks ago, is that the fact that Elimelech died, if you are a student of Hebrew writings, you would know that whenever there's a patriarch of the family that passes, there's a domino-like effect that hell seems to break loose in a family. Because the patriarch figure is such a relied upon component of the family. In other words, as he goes, so the family goes. And so when he exits and he's gone, the family's just trying to unravel and figure out forward as soon as possible. But generally, throughout even biblical texts, when the patriarch of a family dies, it is a very big deal, and it has that rippling effect throughout their whole family. So when this relative walks in, and just so happens to be the field in which Ruth enters in, and then he says, "My daughter," he is not just saying, "I'm an old man and you're a young woman," and using a nice little, making her feel good. He is assuming Elimelech's place as the responsible patriarch of that family. That's a big deal, because there's a vacuuming hole there. So let's not pass that up. That's a big thing happening there. But from the outset, Boaz makes it clear to this widow, as we just read, that her wandering days are over. In fact, the literal rendering of that phrase would be, "You shall not wander." Again, another theme throughout chapter 2, gleaning and then wandering. And Boaz is saying, your wandering days are over. The verb in verse 8 keep close, when he says, keep close to my young women, to his servants, it's better translated as the word stay. And it's actually the same word that was used back in chapter 1 in verse 14 when Ruth clung to Naomi. It has Genesis ties, the same kind of clinging that we read in Genesis chapter 2 where a man is to leave his mother and father and cling. Same picture here. Was in chapter 1, and that same verb is used in verse 8. The verb form of that same, that word. So Boaz, in essence, again, not is he only assuming Elimelech's place as the responsible patriarch of the family, which is huge. Some would say that's the biggest deal of the whole story. That's the problem that creates the rest of the storyline. Not only is he doing that, but he's also inviting Ruth to cling to him as tightly as she now clings to Naomi. We read that in chapter 1. And it's also important to understand that Boaz is under no obligation to do this for a foreigner widow. Like, he's not just following the rules. The rules would be is that they wouldn't harvest the entire field, that they would leave scraps for the poor and the sojourner. That's what was binding by the law. But any of these things that Boaz has begun to say to Ruth, he's not bound by any law. The offer Boaz makes Ruth is a clear picture of what grace looks like. He also seems to hold authority as well. And he's given the command to young men to not touch her or take advantage of her sexually, which is what that word means there. He's even thought down to the last detail of, like, if you get thirsty or when you get thirsty as you are bringing in this harvest, water's over here. Continuing in verse 9, then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground, and said to him, why have I found favor? There's that word again. Why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I'm a foreigner? Ruth wants to know why she's the recipient of such undeserved grace. And she knows that it's obvious that she's not from here. So she knows why she would be noticed from among a crowd. That one's not from here. It's like when I moved to West Tennessee. Where are you from? Because I know everybody, and I don't know you. That's where she was, except way more extreme. It's obvious that she's not from here, and that would be obvious why she was noticed. But the typical foreigner would be grateful to live on the fringes of society. And Boaz, with what he's offering her, has placed her right in the center. Right in the smack dab middle of everything. No fringes. Protection. Food. Water. Right in the middle of it. That's the offer that he's making. Verse 11, but Boaz answered, because she's asked a question, so I'm thankful Boaz answers. All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. So we see that Boaz's grace, and he's definitely extending grace, because she's not done anything specifically for him. But Boaz is not giving this knee-jerk reaction. He's done his homework. In fact, the phraseology of verse 11 would be her story. It has been explained and re-explained to me. That's a more literal rendering of what Boaz is saying to her. In other words, your story has been explained to me and re-explained. multiple sources, he's done his homework on this foreigner. And he is impressed by all that she's left behind. And he understands the risk that she took to leave her people and come to a foreign land. The irony is that's exactly what Elimelech and Naomi and her sons had to do. So he gets this. He understands. They've just come out of a great famine. And Boaz has thought this through, and he's already determined to welcome this young foreigner woman into the Bethlehem community. And like Ruth, can I submit to you that as we journey, maybe through our own personal tragedy, or maybe just as we just go through life in general, that we don't know who's watching. I mean, we know God's watching us. I don't know if you grew up singing that song, God is watching us. And he is, but so are others. And we don't know who's watching us. And it's not that we need to put on this persona to look good. I'm just saying, people listen and watch us. People that believe in this Jesus thing, this following Jesus life, and people are watching. Ruth has no idea that this guy would even know her or even have heard of her, but her story had been explained and re-explained to him. And so we can be reminded too that we just simply don't know who is watching us. And at times it may feel like you and I are alone in our pain. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you currently are there. And it may seem like nobody cares, but that's just simply not true. You are seen. You are known. And you're not alone. God is watching, and he's not the only one watching. Finally, in verse 12, if you were to say, if there's a passage or a verse in the book of Ruth that kind of encapsulates the story of Ruth and the whole point, man, verse 12 of chapter 2 would be a great one. In fact, it's one of maybe two verses that I would say is the verse for this book, and here it is. Ruth chapter 2, verse 12. The Lord, these are Boaz's words to Ruth, the Lord repay you for what you've done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord, God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Remember back in chapter 1 where Naomi's trying to get Ruth to go back home. And Ruth says, nothing. May God deal with me severely if anything but death separates me from you. Wherever you are, wherever you sleep, that's where I'll be. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. She may not have fully understood what she was buying into or what she was clinging to. But here we see a picture of the ripple effect of that commitment. As Ruth, a foreigner woman, is committing to this widowed mother-in-law, she's committing to her people, she's committing to her land, she's committing to her God. And so, the assuming patriarch of the family then speaks a word of blessing over her and says, you know that God that you said, your God will be my God? The Lord repay you for what you've done. A full reward given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, the one that you committed to. You didn't even understand who you're fully committing to, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Boaz speaks this word of blessing over Ruth, and that same Yahweh would repay and give a full reward. And the word repay there is a verb form of the word shalom. And shalom usually is a way of greeting, but it's translated in many different ways, honestly, in English Bibles especially. It can be rendered, shalom can mean to complete, to make whole, to restore, to make good, or to even to pay back, which we see a lot of that even explained here in this one verse. But because of versions differing greatly on these different translations, and again, the word shalom can mean so many different things, we're wondering maybe in this text, what is the specific meaning of that? So the Syriac Bible even uses another word other than shalom, and in its text it could have actually used the word shalom, but it doesn't. It used a word that's maybe helps us understand the kind of shalom that the author intended. And the word that the Syriac Bible meant or uses is the word that means to spring up or to bud like a flower. And so, again, with this word shalom being so full of different types of meaning and having so many different options to choose from, we see earlier text saying, using a word to spring up, to bud like a flower. And so we see like this, almost this blossoming, or this, as we know the word shalom, to make whole, to restore, to blossom like a flower. It's kind of the picture that we get here. That Ruth, that Boaz is saying to Ruth, either way, regardless of kind of what word intent that the author's using, it would seem to mean that Boaz is speaking about Ruth's spiritual growth, that her spiritual growth is in view here rather than just the legalities of her agreement with Boaz, even to like this, the completing, to bring to maturity, to blossom, or to, like a flower, to bloom. And that's this blessing that Boaz speaks over Ruth. Probably fully aware that she didn't know what she was committing to when she made this statement to Naomi, but she meant it. And so he's speaking this blessing over her. And lastly, Boaz wants Ruth to understand the God that she bravely but ignorantly pledged allegiance to is not like any other God. As a Moabite woman in this part of the world, polytheism was the thing. We see this even in the life of Jesus. I mean, Rome and everyone around was like, they have a God for this and a God for that. The words that Boaz uses is, first of all, the God, Yahweh, the only true God, is not like any of the other smaller, lowercase g gods. That he's more than just a rewarding God, because he uses that phraseology there to reward, like, may the Lord reward you for the way that you've loved and that you've committed yourself to Naomi. But all Eastern religions would have believed their lowercase gods to be rewarding gods. But this God would be different. He said, this God is one whose wings under you can take refuge. Now that's a new thought for an Eastern, for a person who's grown up in Eastern religions. That would have caught her attention, that this God is not like all the other lowercase gods, that this God is one whom under his wings I can take refuge. And so, no matter what you're going through, this God is the one that can make us whole, in whose wings that we can take refuge in. And like Ruth in this moment, that you are seen, you are known, and you are loved. And so that's maybe what you needed to hear today. And so for the application of this passage, I have a question for you as we close. Which character in this story do you relate to most? Which character in this story do you relate to most? The three that I'm going to maybe mention would be, do you relate most right now, where you're at, in this season, in this part of your life? Do you relate most to Naomi? Has tragedy thrown you into a tailspin? Like T-boned out of nowhere, didn't see it coming. Are you now confronted with the option to live in denial of this new normal, or are you willing to accept the lot that you've been handed? That's where Naomi was. And an honest assessment might not change your circumstances. In fact, it probably won't. But it could allow you to take the first step in the process, and it is a process of grief or finding forward. So are you Naomi? Is that you? You see yourself there? Can you picture yourself in her sandals? Next, maybe if you're not Naomi, are you Ruth? Can you relate to her right now in the phase of life that you're in? Has tragedy opened your eyes not only to maybe physical needs, but maybe things that are even deeper or more important than those physical needs? Has tragedy opened your eyes to maybe what you've needed all along? Grace. And whether it's the physical or the spiritual, has physical need opened your eyes to the much more important essential? Are you willing to go to the fields and glean to find favor in His sight, like Naomi or like Ruth did? Because if you do, God's word is very clear. If you seek Him, you will find Him. If you draw near, He will draw near to you. As I've already said, you are seen. You are known. He knows you better than you know yourself. And according to Boaz, refuge can be found under his wings. Are you willing to hope again, though? Because that risk is involved. To put yourself out there again. Are you willing to hope again? Are you willing to take another chance? To trust someone again? And are you willing to, like Ruth did, wait patiently? To wait patiently for Him to answer. Can you connect with Ruth? Or maybe lastly, if you can't connect to either of them, then I would think that you're going to have to connect to this one, because, this character dimension is just like, it comes full circle. So can you relate to Boaz? Can you relate to Boaz? Has God brought you alongside someone else who is walking through their own personal hell? So if you're not going through tragedy and you don't know anyone that's going through tragedy, you need some friends. But if you find yourself, and it's a little maybe too easy to slide into the sandals of Boaz because you can relate well to them, let me remind you that God wastes nothing and God makes no mistakes. Like He's the epitome of resourcefulness. He's never wasted anything. And although He may not be the reason why you're walking through your own personal hell, He will use that to accomplish His purposes and to advance His plan for your life and in those around you, if you let Him. Are you willing, like Boaz, if this is you, to be the vessel through which God would speak a blessing over that person who's hurting and walking through a season of pain in your life? Would you be willing to be that vessel and to speak God's blessing to, and that God's blessing would be able to speak through you to that person He's brought you alongside? And maybe lastly, as we're about to see, and we've maybe started to see a little of, like Boaz, would you be available to be the answer to the prayer that that person in your life's been praying? Would you be willing to be a conduit of the same blessing that you've prayed for or you've spoken, and that you know God wants to do in that person's life? Would you be willing to be like Boaz, the very person that God would love to be the conduit and through which he blesses them? So who is it? Naomi, Ruth, or Boaz? I think you could find yourself in any or a few, if not all, of these characters. And so I'd like to challenge you today, whichever character that is, would you lean in? Would you lean in? All we did is read 12 verses today. But lean into wherever it applies. As we close today, I'm hoping this is not a theme, but this is just probably as Ruth or anyone else would say in this story, I'm hoping this just isn't a theme, but today we're going to actually get to say goodbye to someone else. We said goodbye to Miss Sherry last week, and we're thankful for the gift that she has been to our church family, the breath of fresh air and ray of sunshine. And Miss Sherry, if you're watching online, we missed you already, and we've been trusting that your transition to Arizona is actually going to be a beautiful one, and one where God, like this story, where he's just weaving his story and through everything that you do, even opening relational doors, and yeah, we miss you, and so we're praying that things are going well. But today we're going to be saying goodbye to a young man who has been a huge blessing to this church family. And like Miss Sherry's story, that this is one chapter that he's entering into that we can celebrate for. People leave churches for all kinds of different reasons, as you can imagine. I've been in the midst of some of that, and some of it I've just been a fly on the wall. Nonetheless, it's not easy regardless. And so I don't want to pass up an opportunity to speak a word of blessing over, and to say thank you, and to let you know that people are watching, and that things don't go unnoticed. And even though humans miss things all the time, God doesn't. So, Cody, I'm not going to invite you to come up here unless you just want to. You're welcome to do that. We are going to pray for you when I get done with this, but I want to say thank you because you guys came into our lives. This, I think, October, November will be 2 years. And your family is included in this, but I'm going to speak to you today. You've been a breath of fresh air that I've looked forward to seeing you every single week. You've showed a faithfulness and a consistency that you wouldn't normally find in an 18, 19, and now 20-year-old man. And I want you to know that it doesn't go unnoticed, and it has meant a lot. And you've been a blessing to this church, and you've gotten up on that bass guitar, and you've given me someone to lead our people in worship with. And for that, I thank you. I also thank you because when we got to this church, a prayer of ours was, God, would you bring a young man that my son can look up to and grow up to be like, that would not be scared to invest time in or time with, even if it's on a gaming unit of which you gave him. One of many things that you've generously given to us over the short time we've known you. For that and many more things, our breakfasts where we get to just connect. Thank you. We are excited about the door that you're walking through. That from a young age, this young man, even from a child, has known he's going to be a diesel mechanic that works for Caterpillar. There's not many people that know as a child what they're going to do, and then they walk that path out. Like, I was going to be a rock and roll drummer. You see how that one played out. He's going to do that, though. He's going to do that. And he's going off to diesel mechanic school in Nashville to walk that process out. And he's doing what a young man does when he's growing up and he's maturing. Takes initiative, sees where God's going to take him, and is surrendering and playing his part and trusting God to do only the part that he can. And so we love you. We appreciate you. And you are going to be missed. But we have a card and a gift that is, again, a very small token of the heartfelt appreciation that we have for you, and that God blessed us with bringing you here for this time. And so if you would permit us, what I would love to do is I would love as a church family to come around Cody and for us to be able to pray for this young man for the next chapter that God's opened up for him, and to just celebrate the season that he's getting ready to walk into. Can we do that as a church family? And then we can even come back there. Online crew, love you guys. I promise that this is not going to be a theme every time we get up here. I'm going to be saying goodbye to people, but the last 2 weeks it's been the case. But hey, we love you, and we'll see you guys next week.